Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Hello and welcome to Never Mind the Dam Busters and part 2 of my discussion with Jane about her book, Above Us the Stars, 10 Squadron Bomber Command, the wireless operator's story. So we've gone over Jack joining the Royal Air Force, his training. We've talked about the first raid, the raid on Wuppertal. And Jane, I just wondered if you could talk very briefly about the next few operations that the crew go on.
Yeah, so this is quite bizarre, really. After the horrific experience of the first raid, bearing in mind they are in the midst of the Battle of the Ruhr, their next operations pass more or less completely without incident. You know, the textbook operations, very little happens. They fly out, fly back safely, deliver the bombs, not a problem. A couple of ops are cancelled due to technical problems, bad weather, etc. But by and large, things are, a tickety-boo. Although they are sort of under the cosh a bit in terms of the numbers of operations that they're actually being required to fly. And there's a couple of times where they have to fly on consecutive nights, which must be absolutely, utterly exhausting. It's relentless. But in terms of what actually occurs on those ops, there's very little to report back. The pale into insignificance as compared to their first op. And I think the crew must have been settling down a little bit, getting to know each other, getting to know how they all work together as a team and as a crew. So but then of course, that's not going to continue indefinitely. I'm just going to remind myself by looking at my map at some of the operations that took place in that time. They went to Dusseldorf. I think they went to Cologne. They went to Aachen. They went to Gelsenkirchen. They also took part in some raids in France. I think it was Montbéliard and the Crusade. So they were absolutely all over the place, backwards and forwards. But up to that point in time, things have settled down for them, getting into their stride, becoming more familiar with the aircraft, obviously, and the workings of the Halifax. One thing I wanted to mention with regard to their training as well, which I forgot to mention it in the earlier episode, was that their operations are all taking place at night. When they were in training in the heavy conversion unit, flying on their Halifaxes, they only had 13 hours night flying training before going on to their operational squadron. Wow. 13 hours. And that's absolutely nothing. They weren't meant to take part in one of these Operation Bullseye training ops, which is where you sort of feign to a raid against a British town. You practice it as if you're sort of making your bombing run to bomb a town. But that was called off. That was cancelled. So they never actually even got to do that. So they never got to practice that in the HCU before they were sent to off to 10 Squadron. So they are pretty much learning on the job, if you like. As many of us were.
Absolutely, the next question I want to ask is one that I WhatsApped you about this because it was very, very thought-provoking and the way that you handled it was fascinating and beautifully done, as I would expect from you. So you've got the Battle of the Ruhr, you've then got the Battle of Hamburg, so to speak, the firebombing of Hamburg, July 1943. And you talk about Jack's language in his logbook, and then sort of more widely about aircrew experiences of bombing and their behaviours and their language towards Wizard Brown and all this sort of stuff. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and this reflection and also Jack's experience?
Yeah, so after the Wuppertal raid, Jack pastes in his logbook a newspaper cutting of the raid, of the firestorm which is created in Wuppertal. And it's almost as if he's kind of in awe or even sort of slightly horrified as to what they've actually achieved. Battle of Hamburg onwards, the language in the logbook starts to change. He starts to use sort of different phrases to describe his operations, such as you mentioned, things like wizard prang or great trip, and it becomes very bullish almost. And that's not the Jack that I knew. The Jack I knew was very, very quiet, very shy, even as an old man, not particularly confident at all. And I thought, this is really, really strange. And I begin to think about, well, why is this happening? What change has taken place in him? And in the book, I put forward several theories as to why I think that this may be taking place. Firstly, he may be becoming more confident. He may be thinking, oh yeah, we're doing a great job, kind of thing. Crew are functioning really well together. They all know their job perfectly now. They're working together in this sort of seamless unit kind of thing. So maybe they are growing in confidence, etc. But then I'm thinking, well, this doesn't really add up with what I know about Jack, the Jack who wouldn't talk about any of this when he got home afterwards. And I began to think, well, is this a cover? Is he trying to cover up what he's really feeling? Is he actually
a detachment, so to speak?
Yeah. Is he actually becoming more and more terrified and more appalled at what he's actually doing? And that certainly fits more with the Jack that I knew. And I use that experience and that language that he's using to then look at the wider impact of flying these operations on aircrew. And we'll explore things like anxiety and combat stress. And then we move into such as lack of moral fibre as well, and how that's all impacted on Jack and the other sort of crew around him. Because I remember my gran telling me that when Jack first started flying operations, he'd be full of it when he hit more. He'd tell them, he told them all about Wuppertal and all this kind of thing. But then he just gradually stopped talking about it. Because remember, Bomber Command aircrew had lots of leave. He used to come home every 6 weeks or so.
Yeah.
So he'd be back home in Seaham Harbour every 6 weeks, back to normality. And how do you actually switch between those two realities? How do you cope with that? 1 minute you're flying over Dusseldorf, destroying potentially thousands of people's lives, or Hamburg, killing people or whatever. And then the next weekend, you're back home and back in the volunteers' arms with your dad having a pint, talking about such and such down the street and the local gossip and what have you. And then on Wednesday, you're back at RAF Melbourne, having to do it all again. And how do you keep switching between that? And how do you actually process what you're doing and be able to switch on and off into those different modes? And that's one of the sort of aspects of Jack's tour that I really wanted to explore in detail and look at in the book.
Well, I really love that you've got that section, and you do take that on. You don't just say, well, Jack put this, blah, 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 blah. You are deeply thinking about this and going, yeah, I notice his language changes. And this is something that, we wrote the Veteran's Tale, talk about...
oh, yeah.
I've forgotten her name now.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant book. Talking about reflections and how things change and approaches to talking about incredibly traumatic things. And I like the fact that you talk about this, you think about this. And it's also at this point, the stat that you give is, end of July, 11 out of 18 crews that arrived at Melbourne when Jack and his crew arrived had been lost. 11 out of 18.
The 18 crews joined the same month, joined 10 Squadron the same month as Jack and the Pennicott crew. And by that time, 11 of them.
11 are gone.
Those crews were dead.
Yeah.
So the losses at this point in time were just horrendous. Utterly horrendous.
It's now that I really want to talk about their navigator, Roy Tan, and what happens on the night of the 3rd, 4th of November, 1943.
Yeah, Roy was, by all accounts, a lovely lad. I'll describe him to you from the photograph that I've got. He's quite small in stature. He's put about 5'6", 5'7", slim build, dark hair slicked back in the style of the day, shall we say. strong Norfolk accent. And on the 3rd of November 1943, Pennicott crew are actually not rostered, that they're not flying that night. But another crew is short of a navigator, and Roy volunteers to go up with them because he thinks, great, I'll finish my tour one up earlier than everybody else. I can chop that one off the list. And, that sometimes happened. And
That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense, absolutely. You want to get them over and done with, don't you? Because at this point in time, they weren't actually flying many ops, and their tour was just going on forever. The average length of a tour was probably between around about 4 or 5 months for most crews. Theirs was 10 months that they were on 10 Squadron. It was just never ending. It was just horrendous for them. So Roy naturally volunteers, and he goes up, flies on and up with a different crew. They are coming back and they crash in Norfolk. I think it was quite a foggy night. They actually crash. It's only a few miles from his home, bless him. They crashed it at Shipton to try and make an emergency landing at Shipton, which is then, I think, an American base, and the aircraft explodes on impact. The rear gunner, Winstanley, is thrown clear. He survives for a few hours, but there's nothing left of the rest of the crew. They're all killed in the fireball. And obviously his crew, the Pennicott crew, Jack and the lads, don't know about this until they go into breakfast the next morning. Where's Roy? Oh, he's not here. Where's the crew? They're not here. And Chaplin actually comes to see them and has a chat with them and explains what's happened and all of this kind of thing. And you just can't even imagine the impact that must have had on those lads. It's absolutely devastating. And they're actually signed off ops for a couple of weeks. But then they are allocated a new navigator who's a lad by the name of Reg Cowles. He's very experienced. He's already got a DFC on this lad. And again, another Cockney, another butcher's son. Lots of butcher's sons in this crew. And he is actually the navigator that Roy was replacing on the night that he was killed, because he couldn't fly because he was ill that night. You might think, well, that might have caused some tension in the crew. They might have sort of blamed him for Roy's death, if you like. But on speaking to a member of the crew that I'll talk about later on, he said it was just the opposite. Reg was welcomed into the crew with open arms, really, and he slotted in right away. Remember, this poor guy's lost all his mates. He's lost the entire rest of his crew. He's the only one left. So imagine how he must have felt. So I mean, there's just these like daily tragedies and disasters. You just can't even begin to process that, what it must have been like. Not just for the aircraft, but obviously for all the ground crews as well. It's utterly devastated.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The people who worked in the kitchens, the girls in the NAFI, the girls in the parachute office, all this kind of thing. You just can't even begin to imagine the impact that this constant churn, this constant death, basically. It just, I mean, do you become immune to it eventually? I don't know. Do you just, there comes a point where you must just have to block it out to be able to continue to function.
Yeah. I mean, I've read about this so much as you have. I still don't feel qualified to say that, and somewhat what people were feeling. I have to say that passage when you were talking about it, I was like, not Roy. That was the feeling I got. I was reading it, go, not Roy. And you've got that moment where he talks about breakfast and such like. It was heartbreaking reading it. Yeah. Very, very heartbreaking reading it. But what happens to the crew now without Roy?
Well, as I said, they've got this new navigator. They've got Reg on board, who's very, very experienced, very highly thought of, But at this point in time, they're not actually flying that many operations. And this is when things really begin to drag out for them. I don't know why they're not being rostered, given the number of crews that are being churned through 10 Squadron at this particular time, whether it's just a fate of the rotor or whatever. I don't know why, but they're just not getting through their tour at all. And that must have been so stressful for them. It must have seemed absolutely endless for them. It must have been awful. And almost a different kind of pressure to those crews who are sailing through their operations. They're taking them up, but this crew isn't. They're getting maybe one up, maybe. I think there's a time in in the autumn where they don't fly for like about 6 or 7 weeks, something like that. And the pressure that must have put on them must have been horrendous, because obviously the longer you put it off, the more difficult it is to get back in there and do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think now I want to talk about one of my favourite passages that comes up in the book at this point. And I quote, every one of the Pennicott crew knew that he had been incredibly lucky to have 17 operations under his belt without having to run the gauntlet of Berlin's air defences. Equally, they all knew that they could not avoid it for much longer. The men dispersed and went back to the quarters for an hour's rest before their operational meal. At 4 o'clock, there was still no sign of Penny. Bill tapped on the door of his room and walked straight in. He found Penny on his knees, elbows resting on his head, hands joined and head bowed in prayer. Bill knew that his skipper was a deeply religious man, but on this occasion, Penny looked almost close to tears. "What's up, Skip? Praying for another safe return?" Penny looked up, paused for a moment and shook his head. "No, Bill. I'm praying for the German people." For once, Bill didn't know what to say and just nodded, closing the door softly behind him. Now, I know that we've mentioned this in previous pods, this moment, and for me, it's one of the greatest strengths of the book is this emotive content and how it's handled. It's an incredibly sensitive topic. But how did you feel writing this, and how did you find out about moments like this?
Right, at this point in time, I think we're going to have to introduce Bill Bradshaw and explain the impact that he had on this book. So the book was almost complete. This is in August 2009. August 2019. It was almost complete. I had the first draft done, etc. I was quite happy with it. The only thing that was troubling me was that I'd never been able to find out what had happened to the tailgunner, Bill Bradshaw. I managed to find out or trace most of the rest of the crew and find out what had happened to them when they'd eventually passed away, etc. But Bill, I just couldn't find any trace of them. I couldn't find any sort of death records or death notices or whatever. Then I was going through the old 10 Squadron newsletters one day, and I saw they used to list the new members. This is the days before data protection, obviously. They used to list the new members and a postal address and telephone number for them. So I saw you, H.A. Bradshaw, and I thought, oh, that must be Bill. So I looked at the address, Googled it, managed to actually find a phone number in directory inquiries. It's one of the few numbers that's still recorded. And so I rang it up thinking, well, maybe the family that live there now will have heard of the Bradshaw family and be able to tell me what happened to Bill and all this kind of thing. So I ring this number and a gentleman answers, and I explain who I am and that I'm trying to contact Dr. Bradshaw. Bill had become a doctor after the war, and did what had happened to the family or anything, or who I might ask to find out what had happened to them, etc. And the gentleman on the other end of the phone started to laugh, which I thought was a bit of a strange reaction. And then he said, "Bill Bradshaw?" And I went, "Yes." He said, "You're speaking to him, my dear." And you could have just knocked me down with a feather. I couldn't speak. I just wasn't able to sort of communicate. And eventually I explained that I was Jack Clyde's niece, and he was like, "You're Jack's niece? You're Jack's niece?" And he just couldn't believe it either. He'd never heard anything from Jack for about 75 years or whatever. So I made arrangements to actually go and see him at his home in Huddersfield. After the war, he'd become a GP and practiced as a doctor in Huddersfield for many years. And I went to see him, and I was just absolutely blown away as soon as I met him. He was still devastatingly handsome. He's 98. He's got this shock of white hair and just still the most dazzling film star smile. He was just a beautiful man. And he was just the loveliest person. Oh my God. I spent hours just sitting chatting to him that day. And he gave me so much information about the crew and about their personalities, about the things they used to do and their sort of little foibles. And it was him that told me the story of Pennicott and his praying for the German people. And he was able to tell me things about my uncle that I never knew, stuff about Jack that I never ever knew. And one of the things he told me in particular was about the Bladen Races, the Northeast song, and how Jack would sing this on board the aircraft, but whenever he was frightened, to try and calm his nerves, because it was a song that his mum had used to sing to him when he was a little boy, obviously a traditional Northeast song, and so just little sort of snippets like this, and about Freddie and how he was, a bit sort of standoffish and very homesick for Australia, and all these kinds of bits of information that logbooks and operational record books can never give you, and it was just a completely different insight into the crew. We talked about Roy's death and about how they all felt and about the impact on them and all this kind of thing. So having spoken to Bill, I then had to go back and rewrite like large sections of the book, and just really brought it to life. It made it a completely different book and so much better, because I had all of these personal details to include, and it was just absolutely wonderful. And do you know something? He still had his uniform in a wardrobe.
What?
Yeah, and his daughter Angela, who's an absolutely lovely woman, she went upstairs and got it out for me and showed me, and it still looked absolutely brand new. It was brand new. It was kept like in a suit carrier, and she just sort of laid it out. And she got his logbook out for me as well. And he said, I don't want to look at that. He still couldn't read it 80 years later.
Yeah.
He couldn't.
Gosh, this is just...
Yeah.
Gosh, this is fascinating. It really, really is. I mean, I've got to carry on with this.
Hours afterwards, yeah.
Yeah. I totally relate to that. I can, so sticking with the story, we don't want to give everything away because, we want people to read this book, but Jack's tour does come to an end, and Bomber Command moves away from the Battle of Berlin and now prepping for Overlord. But that's not the end of the story for the crew, and I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about Freddie at this point.
Yeah, so Freddie had been ill over the Christmas time, and he'd missed quite a few ops, so he wasn't allowed to finish his tour at the same time as the rest of the crew. So he had to stay behind and continue on for, I think it was about 6 ops he had to do. And then in April, I think it was a raid on Aachen, he was flying as I think he was flying as a ray gun on that up actually, rather than mid-upper gunner, and they were shot down. And Freddie survived, but only just. He'd actually been hit through the upper thigh with a cannon shell. It had gone straight through his leg. No, that's right. He was still in the upper gun turret, because he somehow managed to extricate himself from the upper gun turret, get his chute on, and managed to bail out while his leg's basically in bits. And he bails out. He's got no recollection of actually landing or anything like that. Comes to, and he's being attended to in a German field hospital. So fortunately, he'd been spotted landing, and he managed to get him medical attention pretty quickly. Otherwise, he would have bled to death. He was in hospital for a couple of months. And then taken to a prisoner of war camp. But Freddie was one of the very earliest people to be repatriated. Quite a bit before the end of the war, he was actually repatriated. But he was on crutches for years afterwards. And that's not quite the end of Freddie's story, though. A particular sad point is that Jack never knew that Freddie had survived. He knew he'd got shot down and that he was missing. But he didn't know that he'd actually survived to his dying day. He thought that Freddie had been killed, and he hadn't been, which I think is so sad.
Gosh.
But Freddie was one of the founding members of the 10 Squadron Association, and he used to come over from Australia every single year for the reunion. And Freddie, as you know, his surname was Singh. After the war, he changed his name to Stuart, which is his mother's name. Australia being Australia in the 1940s and 1950s, obviously, well, let's face it, quite a sort of racist place, as were many places, Britain included as well. And he changed his name and rejoined the Royal Australian Air Force, and he eventually became squadron leader. Oh,
Wow.
quite the adventure for Freddie. But yeah, other members of the crew. I became an instructor. Oh, do you want to go into that bit now?
Well, that's the next question, is it? What's next in Jack's journey? So, yeah, carry on, please.
Jack, after completing his tour, he has about 6 weeks leave, I think, and then he's sent off to become an instructor to train other wireless operators. And he's sent off all the way up to RAF Kinloss in Scotland. And he's very lucky because he doesn't get called up to do a second tour. And he sits out the rest of the war at RAF Kinloss, basically, just working as an instructor. And I find it quite hard to believe that Jack had the confidence to do that. But he must have done, having been through a full tour and known his role as a wireless operator absolutely inside out. Because, as I say, he was always quite a shy, quiet sort of lad. But it's funny because he was sent on a course to learn how to be an instructor. I've got all of his notes from the course as well, and he actually. There's all these tips that he's written down about making eye contact with people in the room and speaking slowly and clearly and how to ask questions and stuff. And I can just imagine him sitting, going over his notes, and all of his notes still stink of tobacco, Players Navy Cut. That's what he used to smell. You can just imagine him sitting in his bed in his digs on a night, reading over his notes, flicking the ash off his, off these notebooks or what have you. So he sat out the rest of the, well, not sat out, he was very busy, and he also had the dangerous job of actually having to go up with trainee crews as well. There were lots of crashes and lots of accidents. But in September 1944, something very nice happened to Jack, something very lovely. He got a letter to say that he was going to be awarded his DFM personally by the King at Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh. So he trots down to Holyrood. My gran Lydia, his sister, and his dad, Grandad Jack, and George, and my mum at this point, who's a baby in the pram, all trot up to Edinburgh, all trot up to Holyrood Palace to go and see Jack be presented with his DFM by King George VI. And I can always remember my gran telling me about this. She used to say that the King was wearing quite heavy makeup, like how Donald Trump wears makeup, like stage makeup also.
Yeah.
So I think he was possibly already quite ill by this point in time, or starting to be ill. My gran said to Jack as soon as he came back, and he said, what did he say? What did the King say to you? And he said, I don't know, I can't remember. Lydia was furious, but Jack couldn't remember a word of what the King had actually said to him, but he was just so overcome by the whole thing. So that's a lovely postscript to the story.
Yeah. Well, we've all done that. I remember meeting Lucy Worsley, and I remember going over my head, sort of like, I'll ask her about this and say you're doing an MA in history and blah, 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 blah. And I did that, and she replied with something, and I wasn't listening because in my head I was just like, oh, you managed to get that out. That was good. Blah, blah, blah. Oh gosh, she's asked me something, and I felt I couldn't ask her again. So it's a very relatable sort of story, that, absolutely. But yeah, I think, we're wrapping up now, really, but I think when it comes to summing up, you write a very powerful last chapter, a personal journey about learning and understanding these men, this crew. And I want to read one section. I've been deeply moved by the neglected state of Roy Tan's grave when I visited him in September 2018. And I took the matter up with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission upon my return home. Roy now has a gleaming new headstone of Portland stone, the inscription clearly visible. I hoped that Jack and the boys would have been glad that Roy is still cared for. I just want to add that I see, we spot them, don't we? With these Commonwealth War graves, they stand out, and I've gone over to them, and I've tidied them up a little bit, maybe wiped it slightly, said a few words of tribute, maybe patted it. It's just the thing you do, isn't it? And that moment really struck me and was very relatable. I felt reading that I was reading someone that understood how to approach this topic, and it was very relatable in this moment. You've got to be incredibly proud of this book.
I am. Yeah, I am. This of all the things that I've done, I mean, this is how many books have I written? 3 now, onto my 4th. Yeah, this is a book that I think that I am most proud of, and it's the book that I always wanted to write. I would say that. Yeah, it's a story that I always felt that I wanted to tell and wanted to understand and to research and to be able to sort of share with other people. Because this is not just the story of Jack and his crew. This is the story of every crew in Bomber Command, in a way.
Yeah.
The things that they went through and what have you, and the impact that they had on them, those who survived and those who didn't. So yeah, I have to say I am very proud of it.
Yeah, absolutely should be. Yeah, it's an incredible book. I guess now we're taking sort of like the deeper dive and asking you these questions about the writing process and such like. Was it difficult writing about your family and did you have to stand back and put on a historian hat, so to speak, to tackle some of the subjects and stories?
Yeah.
Gathering this information and such like, was that something that you had to consciously do?
Yeah, it was almost like I was writing 2 stories. I was writing the story of 3, because I was telling the story of the Second World War in the northeast of England. I was telling the story of Bomber Command, and I was telling the story of my family. So there was almost like 3 distinct threads, if you like. But yeah, I mean, I will freely admit that I basically soaked my way through this book. All the way through it, basically. It was very, very difficult to write, even though obviously Jack did survive. It was just so emotional. Getting to know the crew. I mean, my voice is breaking up now thinking about it. Just getting to know the crew, their stories, etc. It was just,
yeah.
It was hard.
It is an incredibly emotive subject, and I've found some of the pods that we've recorded incredibly difficult. And I've had to have a moment when we stopped recording of just like, whew.
The one we did with Andrew Pounton, God, that was just horrendous.
That was.
It was just about.
Yeah.
It was a complete wreck after that. Yeah, I was like.
Yeah. I think I've held it together every time, but trust me, I was very, very close on a number of occasions. Yeah, I guess the next question, I know this is one that you wanted me to ask, is I was going to write my PhD thesis about the memory of the air war at the moment, and I've looked at my MA dissertation since. That's 2015 I submitted that, so it's 10 years, and I know there are things that I would change. I've had research since then. I've learned a lot about approaches. I wouldn't say there's anything major I would change about it, but certainly small edits and changes I would make. And I mean, 5 years on from Above Us the Stars, how might the book differ if he wrote it today?
Okay, so I didn't know anything about Bomber Command when I started this process and when I wrote this book. I didn't know anything about it at all, apart from what I'd seen on the Dam Busters, I'd read a few books, of course, loads of films, that sort of thing, just general interests, the same level of interest as anyone who's sort of got a big interest in the Second World War, I guess. So it was a very, very steep learning curve in terms of learning about sort of the structure, about, the sort of pattern and a sequence of events, learning about the different aircraft types, learning about the organizational structure of the RAF, learning about things like LMF, so much stuff to take on board. I kind of did the best I could with it in the role of, I would say, an enthusiastic amateur, which is what I was. Well, I'd say it's probably still that. At that time. But in writing that book, it made me realise how little I actually knew. And I really wanted to address that. So that's why I signed up for the MA in Second World War Studies at the University of Wolverhampton. And that completely was a game changer for me. I learned so much. It was such a fantastic course, a course that you're very familiar with, James, obviously.
Yes. Taught it the last couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it was out of that my sort of obsession with mine laying came, because that's what I wrote my thesis on, my master's thesis. So yeah, now I would say if I was to write this book now, it would be different, but I don't know if it wouldn't be the same book, and I'm not sure that it would be as good. Yeah, I might have got some of the historical details wrong, regarding marks of aircraft or bits and pieces, like that. But I think in a way, writing it without sort of the knowledge of a professional historian allowed me to embrace the emotive side of it more, I would say, and tell the personal stories in a different way. I think if I was writing it now, it would probably be more sort of clinical, more analytical. And I'm not sure that it would have the same emotive impact, if you like. I don't know. I mean, yeah, there are certain changes that I would make here and there, just, a couple of factual things I know I've made a mistake on, which people love to point out to you as well, don't they? They absolutely love that. I actually had people message me to tell me there was like 5 typos in the book, or there was a missing full stop in such and such a place. Yeah, now I'm thinking, get seriously. Yeah, why do people do that?
This is the thing, actually. I'm about to get on my soapbox here, potentially. But when people are at Pennicott and they'll point out, you got the date wrong of this, or it was the wrong mark of aircraft. Look at the overall story and how it's being handled. That is what matters here. It doesn't matter that you said it was a Mark III Halifax instead of a Mark II or whatever, or it was the wrong type of bomb or whatever. Look at the overall story. Look at how, and the book handles it beautifully. I got to say, I read through it. I didn't notice those mistakes, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for
yeah, every book has mistakes.
It handles this, it's, yeah.
Every book has mistakes, has typos or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so...
And we're all our own worst critic as well, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've been blessed with some really, really lovely reviews for it. And, it's got some like 4.8 stars on Amazon or whatever. And I'm really, really grateful to everyone who has read it and who's enjoyed it. And it's provoked so much discussion. I've had so many messages from people saying, oh, yeah, my granddad was a wireless operator, and nobody ever talks about the wireless operators. I'm really pleased you did. Or no one ever talks about the Halifaxes.
Yeah.
It's great to see. I've also had people from my hometown or who have connection to my hometown. So it's so great to hear about someone talking about the Northeast during the war and about our hometown in particular, telling the story of Seaham Harbour and its contribution to the war effort and how its people were impacted. So that's always nice, and it's just lovely when people reach out with comments like that.
It's a wonderful book, and there's a reason why I was a bit starstruck, so to speak. I'm going right back to the start of the pod when I was like, oh my God, that's Jane. She wrote a fantastic book, Bomber Command. How do I ask her to sign this book? There's a reason for that. It's an incredible book. It's a wonderful book. And anyone who's listening that hasn't read it, you know what to do. Go out and go and read it. Grab a copy. I mean, that's the next question is, where is the best place to get a copy and maybe a signed copy? I guess they can, because you've had another run of print, haven't you? I think the last year or so. So yeah. Where's the best place that people can get this?
Yeah, it's always in print. I've got copies. You can get them from me from my website, which is justcuriousjane.com. We'll put the link in the show notes if you want a signed one. Otherwise, all the usual places, Amazon, Waterstones, etc., all the usual places. It's also available as an ebook. There is a Kindle version on Amazon if you're a Kindle person as well. So yeah. And I love answering questions about, if anyone ever has any questions, just drop me an email or whatever, or if you want to talk about anything that the book raises or any issues or whatever, just get in touch and happy to chat about it. Or come and see me at WeFace. Yeah, I'll be there.
Well, wonderful. Well, that is sadly time to wrap up. It's been a brilliant, fascinating chat, an emotive chat as well. But as I say, that is all that we've had time for. Jane, thank you so much for telling me more about Above Us the Stars. And I'm sure I speak for all the listeners to say that was absolutely fascinating. Do pick up a copy if you can, listeners. And if you're enjoying the show, we would love you to leave a review or a star rating on your favourite podcast platform. It's a huge help in connecting with other like-minded history enthusiasts. Want early access to episodes, live streams and exclusive Q&A sessions? You can support the show for £2.40 a month or $3 a month. Simply follow the link in the show notes or visit nevermindthedambusters.buzzsprout.com. Join the conversation as well in our Facebook discussion group, and do follow us on all the usual channels of social media. If you'd like to reach out, as Jane just said, do send us a message on the top of the show notes. Thank you ever so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. And I knew I wouldn't get through that episode without blubbing a little bit. But yeah, thanks for listening. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Free audio post-production by phonic.com.